Hello, hello. It's DNN Dave, and this is Southern Fried DNN Meetup. Welcome, everybody. I hope everybody is doing well today. We're in the middle of the afternoon here on the eastern side of the United States, but we have people joining from all over the world. So, and you may be just watching this on a replay afterwards. And thanks for tuning into the YouTube channel or visiting southernfrieddnn.com and checking out the excellent content. We will be hearing a bit later from Laura Pierson of 10 Pound Gorilla, and Gorilla. And they're based out in the Midwest and Denver area, and she's going to be talking a little bit about designing for accessibility today. So looking forward to that. But before we jump into her presentation, let's do a little bit of community news here. And I'll see if I can share my screen here. Hopefully everybody can see that okay. Is everybody seeing the meetup page? Okay, good. So we'll jump into this in a little bit, but I was doing a little bit of tour around several DNN community related sites and channels and social areas and kind of seeing what's been going on. And I'm glad you're here, Aaron, because I wanted to highlight, I mean, you've been on a roll lately. Do you want to give us just a little bit overview of what we could find in these latest 3 blog posts that you have out here within the last month?
Yeah, I mean, they're all videos. 2 of them are about Tailwind and how they can help sort of make front-end development easier, especially in DNN. Yeah, I hope people check it out and comment and yeah, give it a try.
You've been doing more of these videos lately too, which I really like seeing these. They're nice and not too long, but not too short. You go into quite a bit of detail in some of them, and I really appreciate that. As a matter of fact, I'll mention a little story. Our team recently, you had shared an idea, I think it was in the Slack channel, DNN community Slack channel, about a method that you use to inject a 2SXC module into the theme so that you don't have to use the display on all pages feature, and you give a nice 1-page admin access to a lot of that. We actually used your blog here to guide us in that. We ran into a couple of little gotchas, and I think TK may have shared some of those with you that he found as it relates to visual queries or queries that were being built and how that didn't quite work the way we expected it to work. But really cool thing there, and we're looking forward to using that. We still have one little problem though with it. The edit capability is showing up when it does something weird that you wouldn't expect. So maybe you've found a way to work around that too. We'll probably ping you up. But yeah, it's great to see these this blog content. And you've been a heavy user of Tailwind here for a while. So anybody that's interested in Tailwind CSS, I mean, Aaron's staying on the latest and greatest and bleeding edge of that. So you've been using it for a while now as a design tool, right?
Yeah, about 1.5 years. I will say actually about the injecting module thing, I was really excited to see TK finally join the Slack. And then it's cool because I see you guys are kind of pushing forward with even more things in specifically around injecting pages from DNN into that, which is really, really exciting that that's something that you guys are sort of helping push forward, because that's something that would be a pretty big game changer, I think, in for people who use 2SXC.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. Now you're talking about the API that's available within 2SXC to grab the pages information and so forth. Yeah, I put a support issue or whatever you want to call it out on GitHub there for that, just documenting it. I have not seen a response to that, but I think they're on holiday at this time, so we probably won't hear anything for a couple of weeks or 2 or 3 weeks from now. But hopefully that'll be of interest to other people too, because it's almost all the way there, but not quite. Because there's a few little pieces of information you would want to know when you're, like, for instance, building out a menu or something like that in the footer, or even at the top level nav from that you would need to know in order to get permissions right and all that. But as with a lot of things, we'll probably find out that there's some magical smoke and mirrors taking care of some of that, and it doesn't need to be surfaced as data, but we'll see how that one plays out. So thanks for putting out the great content there, Aaron. Sorry to put you on the spotlight. That seems like I do that every time I'm seeing here. So
no worries. Thanks.
Let's see. The other highlight that I wanted to do here as it relates to community. Well, I did not mean to bring this up. I meant to bring up GitHub activity. Okay, so recently there's been quite a bit of flurry of activity, and you may have seen it if you're following the DNN platform GitHub repo. There's been quite a lot of activity lately around things that are related to the release of 9.11.0, which I'm sure you're all sitting on the edge of your seats waiting for that to come. But we want to make sure things are right. And there's been quite a few contributions from DNN Corp on this one as well. So it's nice to see them back and involved with some of this. And a few of these recently that see this one's from Brian Dukes, it looks like, where upgraded Log4Net. So that's nice to see. So there's a lot of security related things, but specifically just making sure we're removing all traces of Telric by default on a clean install and by option on upgrades. So it's nice to see a lot of that coming together. One piece of that we've talked about several, well, I think we usually touch on it about every month, but we should probably touch on it again since Daniel Velatis is here. Do you want to give us a bit of an update on kind of what's been going on? I know you had some recent successes with the new resource manager, not to be confused with the existing resource manager. You want to give a little bit of update on some of the successes there?
Yeah, so the one that's installed by default currently is the Telerik one, and there's an optional Telerik removal steps in the release notes with a resource manager that is not great on the UI side of it. So a lot of people are kind of reluctant to make that move if file management is an important thing, like they're missing features and it's cumbersome and stuff. So it's a remake of the resource manager. So it's going to be an in-place replacement of, it's not a new module, it's a rebuild of the existing one. So it should replace it in place, and it can be used as a module. And the goal is to also make it directly integrated into the persona bar as a step 2. So it's been a massive development work, and it's really improved because you have a list view and a tile view, infinite scroll, search is improved. You can perform actions on multiple files, so you can pick 3 files and delete them, and a lot of cool features, including, since this presentation is about accessibility, everything it can be done by keyboard also. So it's a very cool.
That's fantastic.
Yep, and it's responsive not to the page, but to the container it's in. So when this gets into the persona bar, it's going to be like sized appropriately, so it's usable in the persona bar. So very cool. I just 2 days ago finished the upload portion, and now we have a zip file that can be installed for basic testing. It's not complete yet, but I'll soon ping a couple of people around to test the basic functionality. What's left to do is implementing configuration for folder providers and 2-3 little improvements, but it's going good.
And I think specifically, I know we touched on this probably last month, or it may have been the previous month, where the idea is to get that packaged, to a point to where a few people can test it. But specifically, there's with the rich history of DNN being around for so long, there's so many features that over time you kind of either forget about, or the current people that are involved in the community just wasn't around when that was done. And one of those things is some features around the social group usage. And there's only a handful of people that I know of in the community that are using that. I'm sure there's more that are actually using it, but people that are involved in the community and talking and stuff, we only know of a couple. So I think Sebastian Leopold was going to do some testing around that as well. So it'd be nice to get his feedback on that, because we're not really quite sure how it's supposed to work, but we think it's working right, but we just don't know. And then also, I wanted to touch on, you had mentioned in the persona bar. So, okay, the game plan, Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong, is for 9.11.0 is to actually create a module just like it is today and the way that the old digital asset manager was, where the module is sitting on the page, but accessible from the persona bar. That way it could either be used in its default state or in a use case where you're wanting to put that on a page and set permissions and so
Yes.
forth.
So the module was built to be a module or a normal module, which assumes that we have a module ID. And because we have a module ID, we have module settings. So in the module settings, you can set what mode it is, like if it's normal or user mode. There's even a user mode. So you have a personal user folder and you can lock that to a specific folder. There's group mode. There's not many, but there's some settings, and those settings are per module. So they assume to be placed on a page. When this gets into the persona bar, so everything was made so it displays fine in the persona bar. Where it fails is the backend APIs, as they need a module ID to get the settings. So we need to adjust, like, if there's no module settings, you need to behave. It's either an admin or a host, basically. So that's the major adjustment. Also, in the persona bar, we don't have access to web forms controls, the normal way. And the folder providers were made at a time where the developer of a folder provider would provide a web forms control for the provider settings. So that's the major thing. We need to figure a way to make that available, even if it's in the persona bar. And that's the two major things. So right now on the persona bar, if you go to site assets or global assets, basically you go to an admin page or to a host page that contains that module. It's just basically a link. Ultimately, those two items in the persona bar would disappear, and we would have a new one called files or file management or whatever that we decide to name it. And that would be in a mode where it's only for admins and hosts. So if you have a use case where you have a group or you have a specific user folder, you would put that on a page. So the goal is that it does both.
Okay, so for 9/11 though, unless something magical happens and that gets figured out quicker than expected, it's going to work as a module first in 9.11.0, and then some point in the future, we're hoping that it'll also be able to work as a persona bar module, right?
That's plan A, and plan B. If it goes good and it's not too complex, then maybe we get plan B directly in 9/11.
Yeah. Well, that would be great if it happens. But thanks for all your incredible work there with that. I think you said that you were kind of inspired. I know the UX has evolved over time, but you were inspired a bit by the way that OneDrive works in the browser and some of the different contextual ways of selecting things and all that you were using as inspiration for this. Right?
Kind of like how OneDrive just works no matter what screen size, and it's very usable and stuff. So it's inspired a little bit by that, but adjusted for our DNN needs.
I've seen some of it working, and it's incredibly performant. So I think a lot of people are going to be happy, because one of the challenges with a very large website is when you have a ton of files, to deal with, and the current big blocky design, there's no list and searches, okay with it. It's not very performant when it comes to that, but this is incredible with the paging that you've done and how fast it's just so snappy. Everything. So I think people are going to be very pleasantly surprised with how it works. So thanks for that. Okay, I was going to mention this one issue again. I know I've mentioned it several times, but just to bring it up again for anybody that's interested in kind of like, if you may be asking yourself, well, when is 9.11 going to drop? Well, we don't quite know. We're getting really close, but if you want to kind of follow along with what has been deemed as something that has to happen in order for 9.11 to be released, there is a specific issue out here for version 9.11.0 upgrade/install changes is issue 4887. And there's a checklist here, and these are associated with tasks, and we're getting really close to being done with these. So anything that is checked off and you'll see the purple here. That means the pull request has been done for, or the issue has been closed, or it has been completed. Let's see what else here. I'm kind of looking around the room. I'm not sure if any of you actually went to DNN Connect, but that recently happened in Mio, Spain, and I mean France. Sorry, Kathy, I said that wrong. But I think they had a really good time, and this is a photo from that event, and they just had a blast. It was great. I did not get to go this year, so I can't really speak to exactly what it was like, but I've been to previous ones before, and it's just a good time. Good friends getting together and having a good time learning about cool stuff in DNN. But I know they were all super excited to be back together again finally, because this is the first in-person event that I know of in the DNN community since the pandemic started. So I'm glad they were able to do that. So it was really nice to see. Anything else that I should highlight about in the community that I may have missed for those of you that are more in the know than me? Okay, well, I guess what we'll do now is we'll shift over if Laura, if you're ready. Again, this is Laura Pierson. She works with 10 Pound Gorilla. A lot of you know Cassidy, who is heading up that ship and steering it and everything, and has built a great team there. And I think is this actually a repeat from a DNN Summit event, or is it modified or something?
It's a repeat from DNN Summit.
Okay, so if you didn't catch this will be a good way to see it in a public way, because I don't think those presentations are available in a public manner. So this will be really good to have out there. We will record this event, and you'll be able to watch it on our YouTube channel afterwards. We usually get it posted within a few hours, barring no technical issues afterwards in the rendering. But we've been pretty consistent with that, so it should be out there if you happen to miss portions of this or all of it. Thanks for tuning in to the YouTube channel. So Laura, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you for joining us, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say about how to approach design with accessibility in mind.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
And I'll stop sharing here eventually if I find the button.
It always hides. Okay. All right, let me know if you can see my screen, all right?
Yes, we can. It's looking good.
All right. So today we're going to talk a little bit about accessibility needs that you should consider during the design phase. And one of the things that I think a lot of teams need to work on is focusing on accessibility early on while you're designing, instead of treating it like something that you just check off towards the end, like cross-browser testing or quality assurance. Frank Lloyd Wright, the architect, said you can use an eraser on the drafting table or a sledgehammer on the construction site. And this really holds true in the world of web design also. If you don't consider accessibility needs up front, you're going to find yourself spending a lot more time and resources going back to take the sledgehammer approach to fix things. So the things we're going to talk about today really should be considered up front, but if your site's already built, these are good starting points for going back and correcting some possible accessibility mistakes. So don't tune it out if you already are well past the designing phase. One of the most common accessibility issues worldwide is insufficient color contrast. The 2021 Web AIM 1 million study, where they look at the accessibility of the top 1 million websites globally, found that about 86% of the top websites had instances of low color contrast on their homepages. And there were about 31 distinct instances on each of these sites. So this is something that if you just take a few minutes and look at how your color contrast is and where you have issues with that, you could correct probably a lot of your own accessibility issues. Having sufficient contrast between your text and your background is absolutely essential for readability. And you can see in the example on the top that the lower contrast on the left is way harder to read. Some people probably won't even be able to read it. Whereas the higher contrast text on the far right is a lot easier. Having good color contrast benefits everybody, but especially people with any kind of vision impairment or simply the elderly. Right now, about 15% of the US population is 65 or older. And the most common vision problem that this age group faces is low contrast sensitivity. I forget exactly what percentage it is, but I think by the age of 80, the National Eye Institute says that you could lose about 80% or 83% of your contrast sensitivity. So this is something that definitely wanes as you age. So if your target audience is an older demographic, it becomes absolutely more important. So what exactly is color contrast? It's the perceived difference in brightness between two colors. And it's expressed as a ratio from 1:1, which is no contrast or comparing a color to itself, to 21:1, which you would only get by comparing black and white. The minimum contrast ratio you need to strive for depends on both the size of your text, also the weight of your text, and the desired level of ADA compliance. So you have your level A, AA, and AAA accessibility. And you can calculate this mathematically. If you are really interested in understanding the whole science behind it, there's a quite convoluted formula and flowchart you can go through where you break down both of your colors into their RGB triplets and then go through this whole process. But to be honest, nobody has time for that. Designers typically are not science or math kind of people. We're a little more artsy. So fortunately, there are a ton of free tools out there that you can use to really quickly test whether your foreground color and your background color meet the contrast requirements. The one on the right here is the WebAIM's contrast check. And this is probably my favorite one. It lets you know both for normal text and large text, and then also for graphical elements like form fields. This one, it's a little more visual. This is Color Shark. And it's just kind of nice. You can adjust the saturation and see how that changes. Another great one from accessiblecolors.com. And this one is the accessible color generator from learnui.design. And this is the one that I will go to if I know that my colors don't meet the contrast requirements and I'm just looking for a real quick, try this instead. Or if you work with Sketch, Adobe XD, or Figma, there's the Stark plugin that you could use. And this is pretty easy to pull up with just a little quick keyboard shortcut. You can test your elements right there in your design program. This is another neat one. This is the A11Y color palette tool from A11yrocks.com. And what you would do here is just put in a comma separated list of all of your different colors in your color palette, and it tests all of them, spits out every possible combination, and ranks them in order from highest contrast to lowest. So this is a great reference to have on hand as you're working through building out different components in like a design system. And you just kind of have that handy and you know exactly what you should or shouldn't use. Knowing how important color contrast is, another thing to watch for is relying on color alone to convey information. This becomes an issue for people with color vision impairments. 1 in 12 men globally have some form of color blindness, and about 1 in 200 women. And there are different types of color blindness. There's the most common, which is red-green color blindness. And you can see in the example here, just the Target website on the left hand is normal color vision. And then on the right is how it would look to someone who is, I believe, red blind. There's different types, whether you're weak with red or green, but they look pretty similar. And then a less common one is blue-yellow color blindness. This only affects about 1 in 10,000 people. But for someone with this issue, this is from Lowe's.com. And believe it or not, the banner there, summer savings on both sides, it was yellow on both. You can see the menu bar is a little bit different. Then the most rare type of color blindness is monochromatism. And this affects only about 1 in 30,000 people. And these individuals are not able to perceive any color at all. They see everything in shades of gray. So whereas someone with good color vision would see the pie chart on the left as being 2 distinct pieces, it becomes a little less usable for someone with this condition. So a good rule of thumb is to convey things in another way in addition to color, like adding some icons here to your form validation. You can see that even with red-green color blindness on the right, someone can still tell that this field is, the name field is valid, whereas the email field is not, because we have those indicating icons. It's great for screen readers too, that don't announce like the color of something, so that you wouldn't have any kind of audible sign that your form's valid. You can also add an additional visual cue like a pattern, and then varying like your intensity of your color, desaturate it a little bit. And you can turn that same unusable pie chart for a colorblind person into something that anybody could see. It's also good if you work in the print industry. I came from a newspaper background, so I know that if something ends up on a black and white page when you really intended it to be in color, sometimes it doesn't quite come off how you intended. Next up, you want to make sure that your links are obvious. Links are so basic to the functionality of web content that inaccessible links are one of the most severe barriers to overall accessibility, according to the Web AIM Institute. So what does that mean? Typically, the pattern that we're used to for links is blue and underlined. And your links don't have to be blue as long as you still are giving people a strong perceived affordance of clickability. So otherwise, make it obvious that they can click on it. To help users with low vision or color blindness, keeping the classic underline ensures that your links are noticeable. You can see if we turn this page to black and white, the link in the left example is far less noticeable. This would be probably affecting someone with yellow-blue color blindness or monochromatism. But because you have the underline in the right example, it's still easily perceived as a link. Now, you don't always have to keep your links underlined. I know a lot of designers just cringe at that thought, but there are some more stipulations that you need to keep in mind if you do decide to go that route. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines stipulates that a non-color designator must be present both on hover and focus. So having like an underline or a change in background color when your user either focuses on the link, so tabbing through, or when they hover over it. Additionally, your link color needs to have a 3:1 contrast from the surrounding text. So if your text is all black, you need to find a color that has at least a 3:1 contrast ratio with black. That said, you also need to pay attention to how your link color comes across contrast-wise against your background. And developer Chip Cullen calls this the contrast triangle. So you're striving for 3:1 contrast between your text and your link color, and then at least 4.5:1 contrast between both your background and text and your background and links. So this becomes a little tricky, and I think blue is one of the harder colors to try to do this with. Normally the default browser blue actually doesn't work for this unless you have the underline. On the topic of links, you want to make sure that static items do not share that same style. So whatever you decide to do, whether it's an underline or simply a different color, you want to avoid doing what our local recycle center here did on their site. They started out doing their hyperlinks as green and underlined, but they kind of went a little crazy with the green and underlined. You can see on the left-hand side, they've got like what we collect in paper, and those look like hyperlinks. So I went through here and I tried clicking on a whole bunch of things just to see what actually was clickable and what wasn't. And I think I clicked on like 10 things. But it turns out there were actually only 4 things that were clickable. So this one is just kind of a usability nightmare for anybody, but especially somebody that has any type of disability, visual impairment. It's going to make it very frustrating. You also want to make sure that you are writing effective link text. Click here is probably the most ubiquitous link text anywhere on the internet, but it's also probably the least helpful.
Hey, Laura, do I have your permission to use that as a sound bite anytime our clients want to put click here?
Oh, absolutely. Instead of just saying something like click here, you want to write something that is descriptive but concise. Don't go crazy. Make it make sense out of context and also make it unique within the page. I'll show you what I mean in just a sec here. This is an example of why click here, especially like on a blog page where you have a bunch of different links that are very similar, is a bad idea. This is a screen reader, by the way.
Number 2, screen readers can't provide useful information. If all the links on a page say click here, when someone who is visually impaired has their screen reader make a list of links, this is what they would hear. There are 8 URLs on this page. URL 1, click here. URL 2, or here. URL 3, or here. URL 4, click here. URL 5, click here. URL 6, click here. URL 7, click here. URL 8, or here.
The same goes for learn more.
There's your soundbite.
Yeah, right.
I love this. I forgot that video was out there. I saw it a long time ago. I forgot about it.
So that's one reason why you want to make it descriptive, as someone using assistive technology can quickly pull up just a list of all the links on the page and just navigate directly to what they're looking for, kind of like a table of contents. But if they all say click here or something equally nondescript, it really becomes useless. And you have to go through then and read all of the surrounding content to understand where you're going. And also if you have repetitive things like click here or learn more, it's also really hard to distinguish, like, wait, where am I going? Like, which one is the right click here for me? So it's just something to consider. It's also a really easy fix. If you go through and just search your site for click here or learn more, you can really spruce things up quickly.
Laura, do you
On
mind,
that topic,
do you mind taking a question now, or do you want to wait until the end?
I'd be glad to take a question.
I was curious about this one because like we run in this quite a bit with if you've got 3 call outs, for instance, on a page, on a home page, you know, and your tendency is to make them consistent and do learn more, right? But obviously that's an accessibility issue. Do you recommend being very specific with these or just taking a different approach altogether with that? That may be a bit vague or you know, on that, but
I know what you mean though. I do like the visual consistency. I'm guilty of that. So what I usually end up doing, since I do both design and development, is I will have like the shorter visual link, like learn more, for people that have the visual cues of the surrounding context very easily and they can understand what that link's going to. but then also having some hidden text within the link. So it says maybe learn more about XYZ product, or learn more about how we can help you with your SEO. Either just some hidden text, or you can also use an ARIA label if you really wanted to. I think the hidden text works better for SEO purposes.
Would a title on the button make sense with more details than the button text?
I'm not sure on titles. I know screen reader support on titles is
okay,
a little spotty. So
Yeah, I know we've done some tricks, with just screen reader only type navigation as well. But that's always a challenge because it's a balance somewhere between the design aesthetic and everything and being too verbose and a button you're trying to make short, text. It's just curious kind of what your approach on that is.
yeah, typically just having something hidden in there, some hidden text, or like I said, the ARIA label, so it gives it more context for someone that's maybe looking at it in a way different than how you are, just by looking at the page and seeing everything around it.
I suppose it has to do also with the level of compliance you're going for as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the fun topic, because I just challenged Laura on a design she did earlier this week. And it was for an association, and there's multiple members. So we had each member listed out, and below that she said, find location. And it was around activities. And so I always like to say the least common denominator of just web browser individual, right, is they may not understand, like, well, what does find location mean, right? Even though it's right underneath snowshoeing. So here, find location, you're going to find a snowshoe location. But so that's where I said I felt like if we added find snowshoe location, then for those people who just didn't quite get it that day, it's a little bit more direct, right? So even outside of compliance, though we like the neat, cleanly little links, it's like that extra bit sometimes just helps eliminate the question for the user navigating the site if they're uncomfortable or in new territory or whatnot. So yeah, it's a complicated subject for such a simple little thing.
Yeah. I think it was Steve, was it Krug? That's the Don't Make Me Think, the classic usability book. Like, as long as every click is equally mindless and people have that sense of they're getting closer to their destination, they'll keep clicking. So that 3-click rule is total garbage. But in order to make that so, you really have to make your links easy to understand, I would say. So like Cassidy said, adding that little bit of extra text for your least common denominator really makes the difference. I hope that answered all of your questions.
Oh yeah, thank you. It's just it's something I constantly struggle with, on like how far is too far or how far is not enough, and when are we going to ruin the design for accessibility versus, the other side.
I'm familiar with that struggle.
And trying to appease clients' desires from a look and feel perspective with, challenging the ADA. And so, I mean, that's where we've just really taken a policy to put, to let our clients know, like, hey, you can't have that because it's not compliant. Here are some other options. And sometimes, it becomes a back and forth for like 10 different options till you find something that everyone's happy with, right? But that compliance is really important.
Yeah. And compliance really just makes your site more usable for everybody. So you're not just focusing on the people with any kind of disability, you're focusing on your entire audience. So I think any strides you make in a positive direction are really going to pay off. On the topic of links, you also want to make sure that you're supporting keyboard navigation. How's that for a segue? A lot of people actually don't use a mouse to navigate websites. My Aunt Kathy is one of them. She has Parkinson's disease, and so her hands are getting pretty unsteady, and she typically uses her keyboard to go through things. A lot of other people are in the same boat as her, anyone with motor impairments, a temporary injury like a broken arm, people using screen readers. people that just simply prefer to tab through things, like me when I'm filling out a form, or individuals who forget to charge their wireless mouse and end up a little bit stuck for a little bit. So by default, browsers give users an indication of which element on a page has focus or which one is kind of the active element should they hit enter or click. Normally you see it by a blue outlined box, like in this example from Wayfair. But a lot of designers actually remove these styles. They don't like the browser defaults, and then they don't really provide anything else. So a lot of sites that you go to, if you try tabbing through them, you'll have absolutely no idea of which element you're focusing on at the time. If it's interactive, it needs to have a focus style. These are an example of like the browser defaults. Chrome and Firefox and Safari for hyperlinks, buttons, and text inputs. And they're okay, but they're really not great. In fact, I forget which one it is. I want to say it's Firefox. One of them doesn't even meet accessibility requirements on its own. 48% of the top e-commerce sites right now fail to ensure that the keyboard focus indicator is always visible. So this makes it really hard for users to actually shop these sites and give them their money. So you'd think they would want to make it a little better. But if you take a look on like Dribbble or Behance or Pinterest or anywhere at different design systems, or even in your own designs that you're working on, a lot of people overlook the focus states. You'll end up with hover, the disabled, sometimes the active state, but very few people consider what it looks like when someone tabs to that item with the keyboard. But your focus states don't have to be ugly. In fact, they're supposed to stand out. So this is kind of your opportunity to have a little bit of fun with it. Give it a fun background, like a really bold outline, something that really makes it stand out. So people that are using a keyboard have a good sense of place where they are in the navigation. These are just some examples. Different ways you can do it, a bold background. I like the double outline on the connect with us one. It looks like it's got like the dark blue, but it's really just offset. Moving on to forms. It's always a good idea to keep your form labels visible. Forms are an integral part of most websites, but research has shown that up to 45% of form fields on the top 1 million websites are not properly labeled and become difficult for people using excessive technology. Part of the problem, of course, is poor coding, but design trends also play a big role in this. In an attempt to shorten the length of the form and reduce visual noise, a lot of times we designers have taken to putting the form labels inside the fields and then hiding them once a user begins typing. So in this example, first name, last name, email, and once they've entered values, you no longer see the labels. Essentially, these labels are behaving like placeholder text, and they often get coded that way. So you'll see just in the source code, it's the placeholder attribute that holds first name or last name, and there's actually no true label tag. And this is problematic for a lot of reasons. First off, the contrast on placeholder text isn't always great. You can see here, I just did a quick comparison of what all the browser defaults were for the placeholder text against the white background. And 3 of the 4 big browsers I tested, Chrome, Firefox, and Edge, passed, but Safari surprisingly failed contrast.
The irony.
I know. Normally, like Safari, since it's so close to an Apple product, they normally do better, but it's a little surprised. Also, assistive technologies don't always support placeholders. So you want to be careful that just because like VoiceOver on a Mac might do it, not all all screen readers or other types of assistive technologies will actually read it. Sometimes you just hear input blank. That's all you get. Also, placeholder text disappears once a user has started typing. And so this places additional strain on someone's short-term memory. By the time you've filled out a form and you go back, you might have absolutely no idea what they were asking you for.
Pet peeve.
Yes. It's worse when you're navigating with the keyboard, typically.
And
once you tab into a field, the placeholder is just gone. So unless
also,
you're reading ahead,
if you have form fill, like the form fills automatically, you have no clue what's what.
yes, that too. So this is just kind of a pet peeve for someone that's using a keyboard. You really have to like pause, think ahead, and then not tab into the field until you're fully ready and you've read the label. Keeping your labels visible makes it easier to double check your data and fix any errors. So like in the example on the left, you don't really know, like, wait, why is that wrong? That's a correct phone number. It's the right format. Oh, because they're asking for my email. Okay, that makes more sense. To counter this, the floating label pattern became really popular for a while. I think it still is. Initially, the label sits within the field, kind of looking like a placeholder text. But then once the user clicks into the field or tabs into it and starts typing, it moves upward, it floats. This does fix two of the accessibility issues with placeholder labels, but they're also not an ideal solution. First off, to fit within the field, the label usually becomes too small for any user with less than perfect vision to read. We'll end up with like 8 pixels or something. Also, eye tracking studies have shown that users' eyes are drawn to empty fields. So having your label sitting within the field where your text entry would normally be causes a lot of users to mistake it for entered data. And here's an example of what I mean by that. It's really clear when you have a totally empty field. But in the case of placeholder text on the left, it looks really similar, but not quite the same. And then on the right, it's still not as easy to spot that you haven't filled out your email address on that one.
Hey, Laura, just a question on this one. Is this, because this is incredibly popular and it's made popular in Apple's design system as well as Google's, material design is on mobile devices. I mean, is there any study you know of that's like that makes it better in that context versus on a website or something? Because I've always wondered about this because it does get small. When you go in, I've always worried about that.
I'm not aware of any particular studies. The one about eye tracking and not being able to spot the incomplete fields. I think a lot of times we just accept it on mobile devices because you have a smaller screen. So you're looking to make your form a little more condensed. You do save a lot of space that way. I think it's just kind of a trade-off.
Just shocked. So you would think that they would, well, they probably did, but we just don't know, that they would actually have gone that far to determine whether or not that's good or bad from an accessibility standpoint, but who knows?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any studies, but I'd love to read one if there is.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Thanks.
Boundaries are important. So you want to be sure you're also giving your form fields clear boundaries. Another popular design trend is just kind of minimizing the visual clutter of forms and maybe getting rid of the border on all sides and just going with a simple underline or just a contrasting background color. When it's done correctly, this does create a clean form that feels a little less intimidating. But the question is, are they accessible? And they can be, is provided that you follow the WCAG outlines for contrast ratio for non-text elements. So when your text input has a visual indicator, like a border, to show that it is an input, that indicator needs to have at least 3:1 contrast against the background. And this applies whether it is a complete border, like in the second example, or just an underline like the top one. Also, if your inputs have no border and they're differentiated only by a background color change, you also need to be aware of that 3:1 contrast ratio requirement. So a lot of the examples in the previous screen actually didn't meet that. One of the problems is that it's really hard for users with like low vision to recognize what's a form field and what isn't. A lot of times the underlined text fields look like horizontal rules or dividers in between sections, or maybe just between list elements. And a lot of times you really don't know where you're supposed to type. So this is an example I found, and I'm particularly confused by the name and email field over on the right, like the top and bottom borders, like it feels like there's a third form field in between them. So overall, I mean, it's bad for anyone with a disability, but it's frustrating for users that are taking the time to fill out your form, and nobody likes doing that. So it's better just to make it really clear to them where they need to be clicking and typing. On mobile, the underline pattern also becomes a little hard for someone that fat fingers things. Most people will target that underline and try to tap on that, a lot of times then triggering the adjacent field and getting a little bit frustrated. I think the newer WordPress block editor is a perfect example of inputs done horribly wrong. You just kind of have to guess, like, wait, where am I adding a title? Am I doing it where it says type, or, okay, there's two fields here. Yeah, that's when, if you aren't quite as tech savvy, it's very confusing and frustrating. Or even if you are tech savvy, I was quite mad at it. But human error is inevitable. And so we need to help people overcome those errors and just design around the fact that there will be errors. So you want to make sure that when you have any types of error messages, they are clearly identifying both the problem and the solution. So instead of just saying that your email address or password is incorrect, or nope, try again, you want to explain what the issue is and a route of correcting it. So sorry, your password's incorrect. Please try again, or here's a link to reset it. Also be specific to the situation. Saying that an email address is invalid isn't quite as helpful as saying that it needs to follow the example of name@example.com. Sometimes like the Gmail login I think of, people get used to just typing like the beginning part of their email and leaving off the @gmail.com. So sometimes that carries over to other sites. Either way, it's just good to have that reminder and help people correct the mistakes. Don't make your users feel bad. You want to steer clear of error messages that make it seem like you're blaming them, like you didn't do this, or you need to do X, Y, and Z. Or just having a horrible memory and saying that I modified my password 1,678 days ago. And yes, that is a real message that I got from Evernote.
Wow.
Yeah, like, do you remember what you were doing 1,678 days ago?
Makes you want to say, I'm sorry.
Absolutely
Nope.
not. That is the least helpful. You should also pay attention to where you're placing your error messages. A lot of times you end up with like a summary of all your errors at the top. And this can be really helpful, especially if it's a long form and the page takes people back up to the top once you've tried to submit it. But it's a little less helpful when you have to scroll back up to see you need to enter a valid email address once you're looking at the email field. It's better to place the error message close to the input that it is talking about. And better yet, it's good to have like that summary or just an overall encompassing message at the top saying this form cannot be submitted, please correct the errors below. Just, that least common denominator in making sure people are aware of the feedback that you're giving them.
I've seen this done really well before, but it's a lot of work technically to do it really well with the summary, like when you do a summary, I've seen it where it actually has a link on every message that brings focus back to the field so that it kind of reduces the friction a bit there. But you still end up scrolling a lot, but it's hard on these complex forms.
Yeah, complex forms are definitely a challenge. I do like the idea of the links scrolling back down so you don't have to try to figure out where that field was.
But it's a one-way thing, right? Because once you correct the field, if you had other ones, you have to get back to the summary somehow. So
Yeah,
I haven't seen that done well, but maybe you could put a link there.
I think I've seen one form that the summary message had a sticky position. So as you scrolled down, it kind of stayed stuck to the top.
Oh,
And
that's
then you
good.
could click and go back to the next one. And I can see that working great until you get a really long form and you've made a lot of errors and that sticky summary is taking up your entire screen.
Or a small device.
Yeah, a little less usable. Final tip of the day is to make sure you're selecting readable typefaces. Up to 95% of information on the web is written language. And so, of course, typography is one of the most important considerations when you're looking into accessibility. A good rule of thumb is to use decorative fonts sparingly. These become hard to read. I would say older generations are pretty good with cursive, but younger generations, not so much. Also, the characters just get a little ambiguous. Is it a D or is it an L? Ambiguous characters are also an issue in any font, whether it's script, serif, sans serif. And a good way to test is to do the IL1 test, capital I, lowercase l, and the number 1. Just put those characters side by side and see how easy it is to tell which one's which. I'd say this is probably really important if you live in the state of Illinois.
That's true.
Also, if you have a lot of numbers on your site, it's really frustrating when you maybe have an I and a number 1 nearby and they look identical. Also, you want to make sure that your chosen font weight has sufficient contrast. And not just in terms of color, but weight against the background. In this example, all of the type has a 21:1, or what is it? 15:1, not full contrast. 15:1 contrast ratio, but the thin weights don't visually have that same oomph that the regular or even the lightweight has. So it's harder to read and you probably want to avoid those for long paragraphs. It just causes eye fatigue. Also, your font size matters. The right size is subjective and really depends on the situation. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines don't specify a minimum font size, but a general guideline for body copy is around 14 to 16 pixels. And you can go a little bit smaller for things like disclaimers or captions under photos or just the less important text. Just be careful. I know the Wave accessibility tool does flag anything below, I think 11 pixels as being too small and a possible issue. Now, it will vary based on the type of content that you're working with. If you're designing for a text-heavy page, like an article, the example on the right from Medium, where your primary goal is to read and there's minimal interaction. Actually, large font sizes are preferred to minimize eye strain and facilitate easy reading. In this case, I'd say 16 pixels is the bare minimum. Medium's body font weight is right now, I think, 21 pixels. And it's really comfortable for when you're reading and you don't have to squint. But then again, on a really interaction heavy page like Google Calendar, where you're really focused on accomplishing a task and not reading something straight through, the smaller font sizes are acceptable. And actually having something any bigger would feel really awkward. So you would have a lot of big text in tiny squares. Overall, just remember that accessible design is good design. It benefits people who have disabilities as well as people who don't have disabilities, as well as people who do. And these tips that we covered, it definitely isn't an all-encompassing list, but implementing even one tip can go a long ways towards ensuring you're designing something that can be used by everybody. That's all I have.
Fantastic. Thank you, Laura. I've been trying to watch chat a bit. I haven't seen any questions over there, but does anybody have any questions for Laura or things that they would like to pick her brain on?
My best to answer them.
Yeah, not now. I had the question about the titles on the links, but Daniel already asked that, so it's fine.
I have a question. How do you, what do you use to test a browser, to test a page as someone that is using a screen reader? What's the current, is it still, what's the name, NVDA or something?
Yeah, that one is free. Mac users are lucky because you have VoiceOver built into your operating system. I'm not really sure on Windows, but I do know that NVDA is free. And there are other, I want to say, Chrome browser extensions that'll let you test also.
Cool, cool.
What is your typical, I guess this is for you or Cassidy, I mean, what's the typical level of compliance you find yourself dealing with these days for most, clients at that level that they're conscious of all that?
I'd say AA compliance. AAA is really reserved for like government sites or ones where you really have to be super inclusive of everybody. I would say the absolute bare minimum you would want to do is a level A compliance.
I guess a follow-up question that is like for a site where the client has said nothing about this, you're just trying to be a good citizen and, think of accessibility when you're doing all this. Are you striving for a certain standard there typically, or is that really just out of scope? Because we're guilty of this a lot. It's like if it's not a concern of the client, we're not necessarily, we're trying to think about it, but it's not like top of mind, like that this is a specific goal that we have. I was just curious if you guys have been doing that it's just part of who you are and what you do.
I'd say, yeah, it's just part of who we are and what we do.
Yeah,
Also-
anymore we just take a philosophy that websites need to be compliant. So with the thing where we'll find is like sometimes we'll have someone come to us for maintenance or something like that, so we didn't necessarily do their site from scratch, and it'll be out of compliance. So we'll bring it to their attention and tell them that, explain why it's important and the benefits and stuff. And at that point, if they don't wish to make it compliant, then we'll continue to maintain. But as we go in and touch things, we'll try to, anything we touch, try to make sure that that's compliant. But any new site, we just really build it into our process. And I think a long time ago, someone had told me, it's like, once you start doing that, it's not that much extra time. It's just knowing what you need to do. And once you figure out what you need to do, it just becomes part of how you code rather than like additional time to make it compliant. That's where, I mean, Laura in-house has really become our expert and helps guide our team and our designers too, just, you know, with some of the nuances of like the form hovers and things like that, that you wouldn't necessarily think of out of the gate. So now everybody's just starting to naturally think compliance. And so it's not so much an extra layer of work, but more just a mindset change of how you code or how you design something.
So you kind of approach it as it was an investment for a period of time in your process, and then now it's just part of what you do.
Yeah, it's kind of like writing clean code or semantically correct HTML. It just, once you learn it, it becomes part of your workflow, and you don't really have to think about all the different rules. You kind of know them.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I
Any
think
other questions from anybody?
Aaron has a couple in the chat. He's curious about ARIA. He watched a video saying that where the presenter said no, ARIA is better than doing it poorly. And that's definitely true. If you're not careful, you can break things more by doing it wrong than just omitting it totally. I don't do a whole ton of ARIA labeling. The most common one that I'll use would probably be labeled by. So like if you have something that maybe there's a description of it a little bit more somewhere adjacent to it, you can use that to connect those and have it so assistive technology can point that out to the users. Otherwise, sometimes the ARIA label instead of screen reader text, like in a link or in a button, just to provide a little more context.
Yeah, that's a good point too. It's not always the fix. It depends on the level of compliance you're going for as well. But just using ARIA label alone is typically not good enough. You still need to pay attention to the text that you have in the, like for instance, the Learn More button. Just putting something unique in the ARIA label is not good enough for a certain level of compliance if you still have Learn More in every button, because it sees those as duplicates.
The way I learned about it, from one of my professors, it was that using ARIA is kind of like, if you can't do it the correct way, this is a way to make it a little bit better. Sometimes it does enhance it, but a lot of times it's really just a quick way to correct something. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's what I was told.
Well, if there's no other questions, then I want to thank you again, Laura. Thank you, Cassidy, for investing in doing a presentation like this for the community. It'd be nice to have something like this out there in our content on the YouTube channel, because I know a lot of people see it after the fact that can't join either because of time zone or just in the middle of the business. But thanks so much for doing this. It was great.
Thanks for having me. Feel free to hit me up. My email is laura@10poundgorilla.com, or you can just visit 10-Pound Gorilla and feel free to contact us if you have questions.
Awesome. Any words from you, Cassidy, in parting? And
yeah, I mean, we just, I guess as an agency, really have gone behind the ADA initiative because just dig into it. It's just good for business all around, and it's good for people. So it's something that we just want to make sure people are really educated on and at least feel empowered and kind of can see the reasons why. I think the most powerful thing is like, that click here, click here, click here, click here, when you can really see how someone might struggle and a site's not compliant, that compassion can kick in. And then especially with like some of the contrast issues and stuff like that, that starts touching a lot more of the general population, and even seeing like some of the forums, how, yeah, that is a lot easier to arrow through, and maybe it doesn't look as cool or as streamlined, right? But from a functionality perspective, it's a lot easier. And I think sometimes we lose that perspective on the web, especially for people that maybe aren't doing it every day and want the new blingy site, and I want it to look so cool. And it's like, yeah, but can a user use it? Do they get the information? And really thinking about how you use the internet, and that a lot of times you're there for information. And if that information is disguised behind this beautiful package, you end up hitting the back button anyway. So trying to find a balance between those. So anyways, we're just very glad to have the opportunity to share that information, and hopefully it inspires people to become compliant.
I know it does me. I mean, you know, it's one of those things where you do, when you're first dipping your toes into it, or if you have a project coming along, you're like, oh, this is a lot of extra work. But I could see the philosophy there. If you just make it, if you just learn it, it's just like learning good code variable naming conventions or whatever. You're just going to start doing it. It's not something that you have to think about. It's just part of it. So I'd like to definitely take another step forward in this on ours. So thank you. Very inspiring.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll go ahead and end the recorded portion of it. Our next meetup is the 3rd Thursday of August. And Aaron, is this the one that you and Jeremy are doing, or was that a later month? I cannot remember off the top of my head here.
I think we're doing a later one. I think. I'm not sure though.
September or something. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I didn't have it right in front of me here. But yeah, we've got a few people lined up. It may not be published on the site yet, but we'll get the information posted out there on Meetup as soon as possible. But thank you. Be sure to what do all these content creators say? Be sure to smash the like button and hit the subscribe and the little bell for notifications whenever.
Yeah.
Oh,
Get your smash
dear.
graphic.
Yeah, exactly. We need some overlays for Southern Fried here. But thanks a lot, everybody. I hope you have a great afternoon.
Bye-bye.